Welcome to the REI Diamonds Show with Dan Breslin, your source for real estate investment jewels of wisdom.
Welcome to the REI Diamonds Show with Dan Breslin on gentrification. Dan Breslin here, also the REI Diamonds Show host, and today episode is going to be not an interview like we normally do, but instead a recent live event that I had done for the Philadelphia folks at the Ring Meeting. The Ring Meeting is the Real Estate Investor Networking Group, which we do hold in the Chicagoland region. We hold them monthly, even two per month in the Philadelphia region, and we also hold them monthly in the Atlanta region. So if you're a real estate investor, agent, service provider, buyer, seller, what have you, you're interested in real estate investing, mostly single-family houses, you should check that out, and you can see a listing of the schedule by going to www.reidiamonds.com to see when we have the upcoming events. So on this episode, I am going to talk about gentrification. And for those of you that don't know what gentrification is when an area goes from general decay. You'll see a lot of vacant land. You'll see houses that are in desperate need of renovation. And generally, it has to begin with a lower income area and low property value area, which then is gentrified and or turned over, invested in heavily by real estate investors like you, like me. Larger scale institutional investors will come in and build casinos, will build large apartment complexes. You know, the list goes on and on and on. And a neighborhood which originally starts at a very low end of the scale as far as property values are concerned ends up at a relative or extremely high values. In the Chicago market, we'll see neighborhoods go from, $100,000, $200,000, and they'll jump to $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. Another 4 or 5 years goes by, and those properties are now selling for $1 million, $1.2 million, and up in some areas. Gentrification, me personally, I am bullish on the city in general. I believe that the cities are going to continue to increase in value to humanity, not just the value of the real estate, but just the general feeling of the city overall. I believe is a valuable place for humanity to get together. I don't know that all cities are going to work out well and progress, but I believe there are certain cities with population trends, job growth, things of that nature, which make them great places for investment scattered throughout the United States and I'm sure around the world, although I've not researched all of them. This is going to be a little bit of a unique episode. I did record this episode and I wanted to share this episode with you, my audience here on the REI Diamonds Show, and at the request of a few people who saw the event coming up on Facebook, I promised I would record the episode, so I will get right to it. A few things to keep in mind. I did my best to get good audio quality. You may hear the audio fluctuate slightly throughout the presentation. Did the best we could with what tools we had available. And the other thing is, you'll keep in mind I had some slides and some things of that nature, so, don't feel confused if you're getting a little lost there. I may have been pointing to some slides, but I think there's a ton of good value on here. We had some great questions at the Q&A session toward the end, and I hope you get something out of it. I know that I've changed my buying strategy and focused solely on gentrification opportunities throughout the United States. And I've known a few mentors of mine who have bought properties that have doubled, tripled, even now worth 10 to 100 times more over the course of 20 or 30 years from the prices they originally paid for those properties in gentrifying areas, which are basically discussed on this episode. So without any more introduction from myself, I will let myself take away the episode. Thanks.
Cool. Looks like we're good. Gentrification. Anybody know what that is? Yeah. Anybody not know what gentrification is? Want to know? It's cool. If you don't want to raise your hand, I didn't want to raise my hand either. Gentrification is when a neighborhood goes, and I'm not like the college professor guy, so I don't have the exact definitions. If there's anybody in here, I want to give you the little disclaimer. I'm not full of facts and figures. This is my experience from real life pulling comps, numbering well over thousands, maybe 10,000 comps throughout Atlanta, Georgia market, Chicago, Illinois market, and the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania market. So that's basically, this is going to be a presentation of my experience, not a textbook case study of gentrification. Cool? Is that fair? Gentrification is when a neighborhood goes from poverty level, very low prices, high crime, high blight, the kind of place that a lot of drug activities taking place, and people with higher incomes move into the neighborhood, they invest money, a lot of private and public investment follows, and then you see property values rise, and a lot of times the people who were originally occupying the neighborhood who didn't make that, higher incomes and were below the poverty line end up having to move out. A lot of times they do get lucky and sell the property for a lot more money than they paid for it, but you'll definitely see a turning over and a rebirth of the city. So George mentioned that we met in 2014. At the time, I grew up here in Pennsylvania. I started wholesaling deals, fixing, flipping properties in 2006. Anybody in here from 2006 or before 2007? Handful? So when 2008, 9, and 10 rolled around, I went back down to the poverty level myself. I have used all of the vendors that are in here tonight are friends of mine. I do business with them, including the credit repair guy who did an excellent job after my delightful crash in finances in 2009, 10, 11, and he turned it around. I got like 717, 750, and 7 something else. It's like not an issue for me to get mortgages and loans today as a result of, vendors that are in this room. I do the sheriff sale thing. Ian and I talk about deals and funding often. So basically, I had my own gentrification experience in my own life where I was like at the poverty line in 2011 and 12. And I started to search around, get into marketing, start really refining my business, learning about mailing lists, learning about the power of, being able to affect the market with numbers, learning how to read the market. And I got a whole lot better and a whole lot more evolved skill set from 2011 to like 2014 and obviously to 2017 where we got now. So I went from the poverty line in that time of my life and then progressed, built the team, and then added the other markets. So I'm just going to give you a quick story as to why I ended up in Chicago, where I now live. In 2014, it was a real blessing when I met George. I had it as my wildest dream for the longest time was to move to Chicago so that I could be a dad to my daughter. So since 2004, her mother and her moved away to Chicago, and we would do weekend visits on Southwest Airlines. It was a great day when she turned, I think, 5 or 6 and could fly by herself, so we could afford twice as many visits back then because one of us didn't have to fly there or bring her fly back. So we were do the spring break, and I was the Christmas break. That was my relationship with my daughter. So in 2014, when I met George, it was I had built up a business that was successful in the Philadelphia market here, but it was always kind of for me, it was a problem that I had become successful here. So my contacts were here. I knew the market here, and it was unfathomable for me to go start over in the city of Chicago. And when I met George, it was it was perfect that he kind of could step in and handle a lot of the day-to-day activities, and that allowed me at the end of 2014 going into 2015 to I literally packed the laundry basket, a handful of things in my car, and drove straight on out there to Chicago, and it was it was wild. Thank you, George, wherever you're at, for making that possible. I have a nice condo out there. I live on the beach. You can hear the waves crashing on the rocks literally outside of my window there. And it's really cool to have gone to that place. And when I got to Chicago, that's when I started doing business in Chicago. And it was cold. It was January. Anybody been to Chicago? You know how cold it is in January? 2015 was record-breaking cold and record-breaking winds. It was what the hell did I just do here? So I get out there and I start business in Florida at the same time. I have Paul in the back because it was warm there, and I knew I had Paul there. And so we're going to figure out how to do the 2 markets at once. And it took about a year and a half before we finally started to get some traction in each of those new markets. Before I started learning the neighborhoods and learning what works, what doesn't work. And it was Philadelphia and Chicago are similarly priced and similarly functioning markets in that the real estate houses are of similar age and construction. We have a lot of brick houses in Chicago. We have a lot of houses at the same price point. We have a lot of neighborhoods that have that same kind of feel like Philadelphia had, but there's also a lot of different things in each market that's different and changes. So it took a while to kind of get my feet, and then once we learned how to do that, I've gotten a little better, and that's when we started going into Atlanta market, Atlanta, Georgia, and we're also in the Baltimore DMV area with Chris. Chris is here somewhere doing great in Baltimore. I'm going to give another disclaimer. I'm doing my best to look around, but I'm getting LASIK surgery in 2 weeks, so I have to wear these glasses for the first time in 20 years. I've had contacts, full range of vision. I can hardly see anybody. I can hardly see anything. I can hardly drive. It's been a complete nightmare. And like the first day, I cut my finger chopping an apple. I walked into something. I'm like bleeding from my leg. So I'm doing my best. And if someone raises your hand and I didn't recognize you and I know you and you're like, why is this guy being such a dick? I probably just honestly don't see you. So I just want you to know that up front. So cool, gentrification, the rebirth of the American city. So anybody know Warren Buffett? Handful of people. Early on, he had, for his investment philosophy and my investment philosophy, so is anybody who's buying rental property in here? Anybody? Do you have a written set of rules as to why you bought the properties that you own? Anybody? Raise your hand if you do. 1, 2, handful, so you know exactly why you bought those properties. Warren Buffett is a proponent of having an investment philosophy and knowing why you're investing in a certain asset class. You know, if you're buying stocks, you better know how that stock market functions. If you're buying real estate, you better know how that real estate market functions if you want to succeed at a high level. So one of the things Warren Buffett did in the early days, he invested on what was called the cigar butt theory. Does anybody know what the cigar butt theory is? Heard of it before? So that's like, you know, you're like a young kid and you have a small nicotine problem, you have no money, and you're like looking around outside and there's cigar butts on the ground and you like pick them up. And you take the last 4 or 5 pulls out, and then they're done. You kick them. So what Warren Buffett originally did was buy companies and then sell off all the assets, lay people off, and he was known as I think early on, if I'm not mistaken, secondhand I heard this, as the Butcher of Omaha. Not that grandfatherly Warren Buffett that he's done so much work to propel his image and keep it high. So his thing was to take the asset and get the last couple pools of money out of the asset and then move on and discard it. There was no more money left. There was no more cash flow. The asset was basically garbage when he got it, but he could see that it was garbage worth a certain amount of money. So for me, when I wholesale a deal, I'm kind of like on the cigar butt theory a little bit. It's not necessarily a garbage asset, but I find my nugget and I take my couple puffs, I make my money up front, my couple $1,000 assignment fee, and then I move on. I have no more attachment to the property. So if it's a property in University City in 1987, and I got the contract for $7,000 and I sold it for $11,000, I took my $4,000, my couple puffs, and it's gone. Today, the same university deal, city deal that you bought for $10,000, $12,000, you might have been the guy that paid the assignment fee, is worth $289,000. Or if you fix it up, maybe it's closer to $400,000, depending on which block it's on. Does that make sense? So the cigar butt theory is not really a great long-term strategy. Instead, Warren Buffett, when he met Charlie Munger, that's his partner who he has Berkshire Hathaway with. And for those of you, if you don't know who Warren Buffett is, he's probably the wealthiest man right now. I know he's, second, third. He's always vying for position, worth, I don't know, 50, 60, 80 billion dollars. And I think that he has $92 billion in cash as a result of changing his investment strategy over time. And his stock price is selling for what, $200,000, $880,000 for a stock per share. So Charlie Munger was his mentor and partner and brought a new way of thinking to his business and his investment philosophy. And that was rather than look for the cigar butts to take a few puffs, do all this work to get my hands on this asset, and then make $10,000 and then keep moving. Instead, Charlie said, hey, you need to go out and get a great asset at a fair price rather than a fair asset at a cheap price. And he was talking for like buying and holding. And so the way that I implemented that into my thing is my goal is to buy in advance of gentrification. And when I say buy in advance of gentrification, I want to be like on the edge of the wave. I want to be in an area that I could buy the properties cheap. 25, 35, 55,000, 75,000, could be more. A lot of times it's a neighborhood where there's still a lot of drug activity. Go on Google Earth to look at the photo of the deal that I want to buy, and there's like a girl who's nodded out on heroin sitting on the front step. Like, not the girl on the heroin is why it's a good target, but because the location is right, but that kind of activity is still taking place, and you can buy properties for $35,000. If you get into the heart of Kensington, that same property, I like to look at them at a cash price. I buy them for $35,000, I wait 10 years, and I want to double my money or better. So if I can sell it for $70,000, $75,000 and double my money in 7 years, that's the kind of neighborhood that I'm aiming in Philadelphia to purchase at. So when I say a great asset at a fair price, I have another example we're going to get into as well. So you can buy properties that have already been in the transitional neighborhoods. So even Fishtown, does everybody know where Fishtown's at? There's areas in Fishtown just over the last couple of years that have gone up 15, 20%. And they had great tenants, and these were great assets. And a lot of times, when I looked at that deal 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, we wouldn't even have signed it up to try to assign it. But it would have been a great asset at a fair price. But I didn't have that as my strategy. That wasn't what I was trying to do. I was trying to make $20,000 right now and just keep moving. Whereas had I bought a property for, like, let's say $229,000, it could have been completely rehabbed. I could have rented it out because it's so nice a condition for $1,400, $1,500, even $1,600 in some areas. And then I could have held that for some cash flow, and then it's worth $280,000, $300,000 today, just 2-3 years later. So buying something in the right neighborhood, especially where what we're going to get into today, some of the things driving, can be like a really powerful strategy. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm buying as much as I can possibly buy now on the great asset at a fair price. So I'm going to give you an example of a deal in a few moments where I paid like what I consider to be outrageous price for a property, but I bought it in the right reasons behind that, and I'll explain that in a second. You're following a trend. There's a book called Trend Following by Michael Covell. Learn how to make millions in an up or down market. And this book is actually written on the stock market, and there's a handful of traders who are known as trend followers. And so all they did, and they even wrote computer programs to do this, was they'll spot a stock right as it's about to start moving, and then instantly start trading and try to ride the move up. So I took this at the advice of somebody who came on my podcast show from the Atlanta, Georgia market. I took this advice and I said, okay, how can I do this in real estate? And he did this in Kirkwood, Atlanta. He saw that the neighborhood was moving. So the Fishtown example that I had just described a minute ago, it's like the trend has been going positive for 15 years in Fishtown. Could it reverse? Yeah. Did a lot of us, when we saw them going from 229 a few years ago, say, oh man, no, the bust is coming back. These idiots are all paying too much for property. And now the properties are at $289,000, $300,000. So the trend could be going up in a specific neighborhood for reasons other than the real estate market as a whole going up. So like the localized niche is what I'm looking for, a trend that I can follow up. Now, in this book, he's going to talk about making money when the market goes down and selling other stock options, stock puts, things I'm not really familiar with and can't speak on as an expert. I know how to make money in a real estate market when it's going down, but buying and holding for the long term, I'm not trying to like ride out the up and down. I'm trying to find a neighborhood that's just so strong because of the things going on in the city, in that micro market, that it just continues to be a strong and performing asset. So buy low, sell high is like the obvious thing to do. That's the cigar butt theory. Oh, you get in real estate, you buy low and you sell high, right? Easy. Buy high, sell higher. That's like a better asset at a fair price. It's like not really logical, and it's not what most of us would say. Like, you know, you can't buy high and then sell higher. That's like the greater fool theory. The greater fool theory says, I'm going to buy a property at a foolish price, and I'm going to find a greater fool than myself to buy the property for an even greater foolish price. And that guy finds an even greater fool to sell it to pay an even greater foolish price. And then that guy turns around and Bear Stearns collapsed and there's no more fools left who can get money. And he loses his shirt, and he's me having to go do credit repair at the end of the day because he made mistakes and was buying for the wrong reasons. But you could get into a situation where you kind of like, for me, I have had my mindset set on buy low, sell high to the tune of doing like 70, 80 deals on the board at any given time. I mean, we had like 25 or 30 contracts come in just last week alone throughout all the markets. So like you can bet our whole thing is to buy low and sell high. So for me to have to make that transition, and I know a lot of people, are there people who are in here just wholesaling properties, just fixing and flipping properties, not quite doing rentals yet? It's like, for me, this was a huge psychological shift to all of a sudden say, okay, well, maybe I will hang on to this property. Like, for me to have to eat $11,000 in closing costs was just outrageous. I just don't even want to have to pay it. But to hang on to a $440,000 or $550,000 triplex in the Chicago market, all of a sudden I had to step up and I had to spend a lot more money than I'm normally comfortable spending so that I can have my asset where I can follow the trend, because I spot all this happening, but without the action and being willing to take the risk, I'll just be that guy who says, yeah, I should have bought in University City for $11,000 in 1987. We're going to start with the evolution of city life. It's important to understand why I am so bullish on the city for the purpose of this presentation. The evolution of city life. So early on, like when, a few thousand years ago, the people who were like farming out away from like the city areas would come to the city. That's where the commerce happened. You grew excess agricultural humanity developed into like the city almost simultaneously at the same time, because you would grow more than you could eat yourself. So you would go to trade that for things like plows and better farming equipment. And maybe you had to go get a goat because you just didn't have any goats, or you wanted another goat. So all that stuff would take place in a city setting, or maybe early on in like a small village setting. But as time grew on and humanity became larger, these centers of commerce started to develop. And then you also have in the city life, you have the exchange of ideas and access to knowledge. So you have like universities are typically located in cities where people were congregating. And so you had the opportunity to just get better ideas from access to people. Before the internet came, there was like no other way than you to just happen to bump into somebody or sit in the library, get your hands on a book. Well, which book do you read? How do you even know? For me, reading books was like a magic combination to the safe of unlocking my wealth from the universe.
Yeah.
How did I know what the combination was? I sat in real estate meetings like this, and I sat in marketing classes, and I went on podcasts, and people said, you need to check out the Trend Following book by Michael Carver, and I wrote it down, or I ordered on Amazon while I'm doing the podcast that some of you have checked out. I order books real time while the podcast is going on. And so like the exchange of ideas and access to knowledge, even we probably have 100 people in the room tonight. Like just the chances of having 100 people to run into somebody who knows a contractor, who knows a lender, who happens to have a deal that you can make $75,000 on, who happens to, the list goes on and on and on, well outside of real estate. This is how humanity evolved as a whole, was through the advent of the city. Does that make sense? You had the exchange of products, and you had the culture that also developed. The exchange of products is kind of going to go along with commerce happening. So people would come to the city to get the better plow. Like the evolution of farming did not take place on the farm, despite what many people think. The evolution of farming took place with the guy who could tinker and the blacksmith who was already like working with metal products to come up with a better plow and to come up with better machinery and all the automated systems that came along, even, more like postmodern times into the 16, 17, 1800s. So the city became like the place to be. This is like where we became humanity that we're all comfortable with now. This all took place in the city. It didn't take place way out where, one family, a little house on the prairie, and they're like sitting there trying to like weave their own clothes and everything. That's just like not realistic for humanity long term. So then we had a period of time. This is a historical thing that took place in the United States of America. And for me, this was like an event-based thing that took place. So in my observation, we had World War II come in. And World War II, Dwight Eisenhower saw the Autobahn in Germany, gave the German Nazis the ability to move the war machines around his country like with lightning speed, like mind-boggling lightning speed. These tank divisions could get to the coast, they could get here, they could get there, because they had these wide highways for the automobiles in Europe. So when Dwight Eisenhower came back, they created the highway system so that we could also move our missiles and our tanks around. God forbid anybody try to attack the greatest country in the world. Here, we would have been prepared for that in the 1950s and 60s. It was like there was nothing that was going to stand in the way of us having the highway system cut right through the cities. So you cut right through Philadelphia, you cut right through Chester, you divide the cities in half. It's like there was no standing in the way of this because it was a matter of national security for us to have the highway system. So when the highway systems came, we had a dual thing kind of going on that created this opportunity for the city life to deteriorate, and that's the suburbs. By having the highways to access downtown, where typically the higher paying jobs are located, people could move out to the suburbs and still have access to the city for all the good things that we just talked about. The culture in the city is also important, so we have a lot of things like the arts, you have music, you have performance, you have restaurant life, you have, just in general, tons of cool shit to do in the city that like you're going to have a lot more of a challenge trying to do those things in the suburb. So a lot of the draw for the city as well would be all of the culture that exists in the city, and that kind of goes hand in hand a lot of times with the exchange of ideas, universities, and just like higher intellect and knowledge overall for humanity. So we have the suburbs, we have the ability to now live outside the city but still be the same 20 or 30-minute commute from work that they were, the residents, when they were living in the city before the highways were developed. And then the highways also allowed industry to move outside the city. So has anyone remember seeing these huge, big, empty warehouses and industrial buildings that are starting to turn into lofts? Well, now those jobs could be located in Delaware County and way out in Montgomery County. They could be located down in Delaware, wherever the tax system was favorable to move the jobs out, to get away from the city. So we had that taking place while the residents would also want to move out there. So we have jobs and money leaving the city at a time when so could also the residents leave the city relatively easily. And then we had, the racial tensions in the country through the 50s and 60s. We had race riots. We had, back and forth on either side. No one wanted to be a part of it. And you had people just moving out of the cities. They didn't even sell the property. It wasn't even like, I have to move out. They just left the houses. North Philly has block after block after block. How do you think the houses had deteriorated to that point where no one can live in them? And a tree grows through a big tree. We're talking 20-year-old trees. You've seen trees in houses, right? If you haven't, keep doing business in Philly. You might have a chance to see some before we get done with fully, seeing our city redevelop over the course of the next 15 or 20 years. So then you had populations trending down as a whole in cities. People were just getting the hell out of cities. And this was not localized to Philadelphia. This was going on in Detroit. This was going on in Chicago. I'm sure it's going on in a lot of other cities as well that I haven't looked into and don't have any information in. So we saw this event take place, and the city now deteriorates. So we see where the opportunity for today's change started to get created, right? Then we have the resurgence of the city life overall. So I feel as though the city in general is returning to the place in humanity that the city has always occupied in humanity. We're talking about something since, Mesopotamia to now, with a 30-year break where the city had lost some of the desirability for many of the humans that were living during that time period. They thought they had found something better, the panacea. We're going to go do suburban life. And I'm of the opinion that there's so much good about the cities in general that we're seeing this take place not only in our city, we're seeing this take place in cities around the country. Certain cities have already taken off, like a rocket ship, years ago. And we saw a lot of neighborhoods that already did change, even in our own city here. So it's the trend has already been going on since the 60s, 70s, when it started to kind of turn around. We're there's still crime, but there's not you're getting robbed on the subway. So it's how you get to your high. The crime has changed from New York City's crime problem in 1980. And even though we don't live in New York City, we can see that New York City has dramatically changed also. So if I'm going to point to any city and say, oh, this is kind of where we're heading in general, if I'm looking at the city, I'd hold up New York City as an example of what happens with values, what happens with increased culture, what happens with the incomes that are around. And ultimately, it's good for everybody. For me, it was important when I was coming out of my own gentrification in my life, going from poverty level to something completely different. It was important for me to have examples, people that I meet, read their books, listen to their podcast, shake their hand, meet them at a networking event. These people made $70,000 on the deal. These people own rental properties. These people might have had similar stories to mine where they went broke in 2009 and 10, or maybe the guys or the examples were in completely different industries. But when a neighborhood changes, you all of a sudden could see the neighborhood change. And if you're open to that and you were somebody who's been in that neighborhood all along, you could look at somebody and say, oh, look at this. This is something completely different. The only people that I ever saw come through here with a Cadillac Escalade before was if they were selling kilos of Coke or at a minimum buying 9 to 18 ounces at a time. That was the example that I had before. Now this guy's doing some other crazy. What is he up to? And I might have to work the nerve up to go approach the guy and say, yo, what do you do? And then he starts telling me about some computer programming, online, internet, real estate, some other thing that I had no idea even existed because of the exchange of ideas that takes place in the city. So overall, I feel that's a good thing that will take place with, or is taking place with, gentrification. So you need a couple things here to kind of in my opinion, I want to see these things on the list. This is my checklist. If the city or the area doesn't have these couple items right here, in my opinion, it's not worth buying. So I want strong leadership. I want politicians who are like talking like Alan Dom, saying, yeah, we want to do another kind of tax credit for the neighborhoods up there like Kensington, where if we build and it's a limited number of price, we're going to, and it sounds batshit crazy to everybody who's already in the business, but to me it's like, wow, we have people who care about pushing this stuff along and who believe in the city that much that we're coming up with new strategies. Has anybody here done a deal and gotten the tax abatement in Philadelphia for new construction or a build? Couple people. That has been like humongous in generating new development. So like Chicago did not do that. We don't see the same type of like redevelopment in Chicago as a result of us taking 10 years worth of taxes off the price and allowing the prices to be artificially bumped by about $100,000 as a result of not having property taxes go up. I want to see developers. I want to see large investors. Developers can be like small single family building one house. They could be developers who are buying shells and renovating shells. I want to see like more than one. So if I'm in a neighborhood and I see like, oh, there's a, the wholesalers like, oh yeah, there's renovation going on the block. Like, no, that's not going to cut it. I would like drive down the street and there's like commercial property with new glass storefronts being installed. I want to see things like, the casino and Bar Blatstein and the Piazza was built in Northern Liberties. Like, I want to see some kind of like multi-million-dollar investment taking place in the area where I'm buying, so that I'm the small guy. I'm just trying to buy $30,000, $40,000, $70,000 houses, and I'm going to like rent them out and hang on to them. And then when the time comes and the neighborhood transitions just a bit more, I'll go through, dump 50, 60 grand of my own money into a gut reno and get like even higher rents and continue to ride the trend upward. I like rails and I like highways. You have to have transportation, in my opinion. So there's areas and cities that are going to remain less desirable as a result of having to take the bus as opposed to hopping on the L. If you had to take the bus or the L, it's pretty obvious you want to take the L. You're quickly straight to the city. You don't have to kind of deal with the traffic. I also saw the rail and the highways. I have a couple other examples where these, you can watch gentrification in other cities follow the rail system and the highway. Like if I can get on the highway and get downtown to the high-paying jobs, then that neighborhood, because of the access to the high-paying jobs in like a center city or downtown area of a city like Philadelphia, where the higher-paying jobs are downtown in center city, and that's where this mortgage money and this increased income is going to come from to start to drive the values in that neighborhood, to allow people to buy properties at higher price. I like natural boundaries. I like water. I like a river on one side or a lake on one side. It could be a park, Central Park, New York, and you're not going to be able to build more houses there. So there's never going to be a huge influx of supply as a result of the lack of supply in the neighborhoods. So even neighborhoods with we got rivers on one side. I'm trying to think of a few others. Rivers are my favorite. I think rivers and lakes, water. We also have natural or man-made amenities, so I kind of want to see the lake, the waterfront. People like that stuff. People like walking trails. People like, amenities that would be in a neighborhood, and it would give them a reason to buy that. And I've seen neighborhoods take off like a rocket ship as a result. So here we go. It's kind of went over natural or man-made boundaries to create supply pressure. Like I said, I want a neighborhood where all of a sudden they're not going to bring 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 new homes on and build like an affordable development in there, and all of a sudden there's just like, there's so much new construction that's too comparable in price to, say, my single-family older home that was built in 1918 that I renovated. If someone can buy the newer construction brand new for the same price, they're going to buy that property, and that's going to put downward pressure on the pricing in the neighborhood that I'm buying. So I like neighborhoods where there's just not a tremendous amount, a huge amount of land. Access to high-income job centers, we talked about that. Attracting significant investment, so a lot of times the political support as well, attracting political support. When you have people who are helping drive the neighborhood, through programs, when you have people who are significantly investing and you're able to just ride that tail, it's going to help the neighborhood as well. It would be difficult. I remember a few years back, a guy was at a meeting just like this, and he was trying to sell me on a neighborhood that was like completely in a no man's land kind of thing. And this guy ended up doing his best to price fix, and he did drive prices. He would do like $20,000 assignments. He would get up and say, we're all going to buy these properties together. And it's, you know, it was like somewhere in Philadelphia here. I'm not even going to mention a neighborhood, but it's somewhere that hasn't taken off, and I don't think it's going to take off for another 20 years. And he would assign you one for $20,000, he assigned you one for $20,000. He got them for like 10, 5, 15. So you're buying them for 35, but really the cash sales in the neighborhood were 15 or 20. So he was just getting everybody hyped and selling them a dream. I have no properties for sale. Like if these deals come up, you're probably not going to get them ever to come through. I'm going to just buy the deal. So I have nothing for sale here tonight. Just fully informative, but other people were kind of like pumping and dumping basically properties and ripping people off. Amenities such as restaurant districts, parks, trails, the waterfront, we kind of touched on some of that stuff. So I'm going to do an example first of the Chicago 606 Trail. They built a trail. The trail opened in 2013. I'm going to show you a map and a picture and why I like the area. Prices jumped 50% in 36 months. Who would want to buy a property and have it jump 1.5 times? Not too bad, right? The neighborhood where this was located, a lot of it was already kind of like pushing and already was like pricey to begin with, but this allowed that like to extend much further out. So this was the path of progress of the Lincoln Park gentrification. If you're from Chicago or know Chicago, Lincoln Park went back in the 70s and 80s. That would be equivalent to Society Hill here. Everyone's familiar with Society Hill. If you were interested, you could Google or you could check out the 606.org and check the map out. So I bought this property for $440,000, and it's located along the trail. So here's the trail right here. Lincoln Park's over here. This is, you know, $1 million, $2 million condos. This is $1 to $2 million houses. Here's the waterfront, the natural boundary that I was telling you about that I feel is a requirement. This is the highway to get downtown. So if you live in Lincoln Park here, you can literally be downtown at those high-paying jobs, about down here, in maybe 5 minutes. Here's one of the highways that comes up this way to get to the high-paying jobs, and then you have rail lines as well to come through here. So here's the 606 Trail, and this was kind of a, you know, $500,000 to $1 million neighborhood right in here, and then now that started to extend down and get like slightly less valuable. The stuff in here went from $150,000 to like $350,000 to $400,000 in that same time period. So cash sales, you probably went from, you know, 60, 70 grand in here, right in this area, to 200,000 in the course of like 3 or 4 years. So when they announce something like this, we're going to build a trail, you want to pay attention to that, and you want to find out if that building the trail is going to be like a pipe dream by somebody in the neighborhood who's like wishing they would do something with the old rail line that was located there before, or if in fact it's funded and it's going to go. And if it's funded and it's going to go, you would be wise to pick this stuff up at the 20, 30 grand real cheap, you know, long in advance before the neighborhood takes off. So my unit is located right about here. This is the hottest neighborhood, number 1 in Chicago right now. It's about $1 million for a triplex like mine. My triplex is located right here. That little shabby graystone right there. People like graystones in Chicago. They will like pay more because it has the gray facade on the front than they will with a brick front. And I have that natural asset of the park on one side. And I also have the 606 Trail like in close enough proximity. So like all this here, this already went off. Everything that follows up the highway here already took off. That's already gentrified by the highway. So I'm buying like in the next wave. I paid $440,000 for that property. It was pretty much rent ready. I'm doing a little bit of a cleanup on one of the units, and I have an offer right now for $535,000. I've owned it for like 3 months maybe. So it's already worth more, and she's like, yeah, I'll give you $5,000. No, I need more than that. Like, like right about here, the same building with the same square footage, it sold for $895,000. So I'm looking at the trend here, and you know, there's some risk. The interest rates could go up, it could stop. I could be stuck with a property where I'm just making, you know, $600, $700 a month cash flow and have to hang on to it for a while. So Philadelphia, South Philly, Point Breeze, Grace Ferry, the Schuylkill Banks Trail. Anybody know where the Schuylkill Banks Trail is? Anybody walked on it? It's pretty cool, running, hanging out there. Way better than the, what was it, a brown zone waste field, I think, down there, and they spent a lot of money to clean that up. That was something in 2007, I think it was. I was looking at one of, I forget whose project it was, Drainoff's project, I think, and they were telling me about the trail, and I thought, there's no way they're building that trail. Philadelphia doesn't have the money for that. There's no way they're going to build that trail. That trail is cool, man. That's a cool thing to live by. Like, if you're into walking around and just being out there in the city and hanging out by the water, that's, like, really cool stuff. And it's, like, the kind of thing that, like, A private developer can't really do that. Oh, I'm going to build a huge trail, and you're going to be able to like ride your rollerblades like hundreds of miles or whatever. Like it's just like a trend that you jump on and follow. I like the South Philly, Point Breeze, Grays Ferry area because you have 76. You can hop on the highway, kind of be downtown, depending on traffic in a reasonable amount of time. You had a lot of institutional development, high volume of residential development, and we're in the path of progress of Society Hill. So in 1989, my dad was in real estate. I was 9 years old. I had a paper route, and that's when I decided that I was going to be in real estate also, because he made like $150 a month off of his rental after he paid his mortgage, and I was making like $29 delivering the paper 4 times a week. And we went to the accountant, and the accountant says, "Hey, a cigar." Accountant says, "Everything north of Washington Avenue is going to be Society Hill someday." And everyone thought that old man was nuts, batshit crazy with the freaking cigar. Everything north of Washington Avenue is going to be Society Hill. Everybody knows about Washington Avenue? It's like far taken off. There's like nothing left. You can't get deals in there at all. And we thought he was nuts back then. And, we waited a while. And I remember like in 2007, 2008, and my buddies are buying stuff along Federal and like slightly south of Washington Avenue in this area here, Point Breeze. And they were paying, I think that the high end of the comps was probably in the high 2s, and that stuff's gone over, what, 350, 400,000 now? And the trend has moved further and further down. And once you get so far south, you kind of had properties that were already relatively stable all the way anyway. So for me, I'm looking at a map like this, if you can see it. This was the trail right here, cutting through. Here's the river. The river's cool over time. The river's becoming cooler and cooler as industry has moved out, and we repurposed those properties in a city like they did with this park here. So I see like boundaries where Newbold, Point Breeze, these are all pushing in from one side, and then there's train tracks and there's a river here, so we're not going to continue to push out that way, and you're going to find that the pressure builds, and when the pressure builds, the supply is down low enough and the prices just continue to rise up to a more and more favorable position along with the rents at the same time. So I'm buying 4 or 5 properties, I think, right now in this area right here. I've never seen them. I'm never going to go see them. I have a property manager who's going to take a look at them. I'm going to fund the deals as they turn over. I'm going to do renovations. They're not in the perfect, they're not in like the areas where it's already started to take off, but I'm fine. If I keep them for 10, 15, 20 years, there will come a time when the pressure builds enough. I'll go through, renovate them, get tenants in there, and I'll just hang on to them for the long term. So I like that area there. Here's one of them, right here, actually. Ringgold Street is Point Breeze. It's kind of already taken off. I think that the comps there are like 160 or 190,000. I'm not overly concerned a lot of times. I'm looking at the cash sale end of things. I sort of look at it like I can buy the property. I know I can sell this property right here for 85,000 cash. I think I'm buying it for like 78. Not a great deal for me. That's like, I can barely even sleep at night knowing I'm paying this outrageous price for this property. But I'm okay with it because my shift in thinking toward the future and hanging on to it for the long term is the reason that I'm buying it. So you're near the Grays Ferry Crescent Trail, the natural asset. I have the natural asset and boundary of the river. So over time, the river is just a cool place. People want to look at it. People want to live near it. And I have the access to I-76 kind of down near there as well. So that's why I'm buying Ringgold Street. I look at that cash sale because it's like if I had to, I could just turn around and blow it out without doing anything to it and just like pay the thing off or at least get my money back without taking a huge loss. So like I'm always watching the bottom of the market. When I'm seeing gentrification happen, I'm like, if I don't put a dime into this property and I buy it now and I rent it out and I keep it maintained, but I'm not talking about granite counters, etc., does there come a point in time, is there potential for a point in time to come 5 to 7 years down the line where I can sell that for about double what I paid for it without putting a dime into it? I want my rent to cover my payment, make me a little cash, cover the taxes, cover the insurance, cover any maintenance, and kind of break even. But like if I'm buying this for 78 today, is it possible for me to sell it for 160 or 170,000 7 to 10 years from now? And based on my experience in watching neighborhoods take off in multiple cities around the country and my bullish stance on the city in general as a function of humanity, I feel like it's a great investment. Some of the other places I like here, Fishtown, Northern Liberties, Port Richmond, and Kensington. Probably a lot of places you guys have gotten deals, wish you could get deals, wish you would have bought deals a couple years ago for $5,000 and $7,000 and no longer can. For me, having the rail line, the K&A land, I-95, for me, it's a perfect storm for long-term gentrification. I see no better place. I like this better. I like the Kensington Fishtown area 100 times better than I like Point Breeze. I just happened to get this package come across my desk for 5 properties, so I'm buying those Point Breeze properties because it's just to get 5 at once, it's less work to have to do all the deeds and the mortgages and insurance policies. I'd rather just do all that at one time. But I like Fishtown, Northern Liberties. I like Kensington. I like Port Richmond, as they're my favorite spots to buy in the city right now. The rail line, Path of Progress going north, institutional investment along the waterfront, and I think that the waterfront, over time, our city is going to get better and better. Our investors are going to get more and more creative with using the waterfront, and you're going to see a lot more over maybe a 20 or 30-year time horizon. You're going to see a lot more high-rise waterfront development taking place on that. It's a great asset. It's beautiful. If you've ever been in any of the units in Waterfront Square, it's they were just ahead of their time and bad timing with the market. Otherwise, if our real estate bubble or boom would have held out a little longer, you would have seen more high-rise developments along the waterfront, and you will with time. So, Fishtown, I hope you guys can see this a little bit, but Fishtown, I'm sure you already know it. Fishtown kind of goes up and you have a natural boundary or a man-made boundary of the rail line that's sort of cut off and created a lot of pressure down here in the lower Kensington area. And then right above that in Port Richmond, I like this area right here. You can still buy for 35 grand. There's all kinds of drug activity still going on in the neighborhood. A friend of mine is doing a multi-million-dollar renovation right in here on a commercial property. Is anybody familiar with, was it 2626 York? Is that the one in Fishtown? 2626 York was a property that was similar to this 85,000 square foot property that's being developed right now in the Kensington area. Basically, the strategy is the same, so picture buying in Fishtown back when 2626 York, everyone's like, man, they're crazy. They're never going to fill that place. First, you fill it probably with a handful of industrial type businesses, and you rent studio space to drug dealers so they can have rap careers. They were many of the first tenants in 2626 York. I remember coming through there, and they would be having parties and stuff in 2009, 2010. Now it's a lot of real estate people that have their offices in there. There's probably people in here right now with offices in 2626 York. But I see that total investment, I believe, is around $4 million for 85,000 square feet. I saw the building when I was coming in on a plane. It was such a cool thing to see the city because I'm now in Chicago 3 years. There's so much new development that I spot from the sky, brand new buildings. I could see the new windows in Jasper Street, the 85,000 square feet, half the windows were in. I could see it from the plane. I'm like, man, this is taking off. A year ago, you could have bought properties there for 10, 15 grand. You're hard pressed to get them for 35 or 45 now because it's obvious. This created a boundary, and it's hard for the neighborhood to start to push past that boundary, but once it crosses over those boundaries, then the neighborhoods take off relatively quickly. I think I have 1 or 2 pieces in here now, not enough. This is one of them I have up there, so 100 block of Witt Street. It's not my favorite spot, it's a little far north, but it's enough, and the neighborhood's changing. It's crazy to see the comps. The comps got better since I bought the property. It's a little bit of a nightmare with the contractor situation I have now. I'd prefer to just buy rent-ready property and just hang on to them for this strategy rather than buy it, rent it, rehab it, refix it. I'd rather just wire the money in and let it sit there and just collect rent instantly rather than have to deal with the contractors and have we had a break in here, people stole the pipes and all that kind of fun stuff we deal with. So the public and private investment in that area in the proximity to Fishtown is what we just talked about here with my buddy's 85,000 square foot warehouse studio conversion. And then you also have access to the L train. So when I look at the city of Chicago, it is so obvious to see the $1 million neighborhoods that grew up along the rail lines. And you don't really see that as prominently yet here in the city. But in my opinion, the cities are going to kind of grow and behave the same way. They're very similar markets in that fashion. The Atlanta Beltline. So I'll keep this one quick because I know you guys, a couple people been to Atlanta. Large institutional investment. I mean, the institutional investment taking place in Atlanta, Georgia is far and beyond. Way more heat than this market here in Philadelphia or Chicago, anything I've ever seen in my entire life. Atlanta, over the long term, because of the job climate, in Atlanta overall, in Georgia, they are much more favorable to big business as opposed to like many of the other cities. So a lot of cities are a pain in the ass to deal with, and they will reluctantly open their offices there. Atlanta does a lot to attract big institutional investment, such as huge corporations that are moving there with lots of high-paying jobs. And you also have the demographics, so people are also moving there to fill the jobs. You have the population growing, creating more households, creating pressure on that market. So along the Beltline, you have a lot of beer garden and restaurants that are facing the trails. So these trails, they usually come from rail lines that already had the right-of-way, and they were like vacant, empty rail lines with like, you know, homeless people sleeping on there and 40 bottles being smashed and people doing drugs back there and just like a bunch of horrible stuff going on. If anything at all, other than a big overgrown mess. So they took these right-of-ways, and they've been doing this throughout the country, and they're putting these trails in. So the one in Atlanta is going to circle all the way around the entire city when it's done. And Atlanta is like a pain. You might be like a mile away from somewhere, but you have to like hop on the highway and go like all the way around. It's like a 20-minute drive. And now you can walk on the Beltline, and it's not. You can go from $1 million house, and you can take a 5-minute walk that used to take 20 minutes in a car and be in a completely different neighborhood as a result of this beautiful man-made asset that they're spending tons and tons of money building. And then the businesses that were along there, a lot of them, because it's right on the rails, they would have old industrial places that needed rail access back in the day, and they would, you know, put freight or whatever right from the business. So now you had all these industrial buildings along the Beltline that they like turned into restaurants and stuff like that over the years otherwise before the Beltline came. And now those business owners are like renovating their businesses and facing them toward the Beltline. So it's like you're walking down the street and there's like people sitting out. It's just like being in a city, but like no cars. So it's like really, really cool place to hang out. I hopped off the plane. I was doing business in Atlanta. And I hop off the plane, and he's like, yeah, meet me at the beer garden, whatever. We're going to have lunch. And I, like, accidentally stumble upon this asset, and he couldn't understand. My eyes were, like, wide as saucers, and we're walking up and down the Beltline. I'm like, oh, my God, the opportunity is, like, so humongous here. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. This is kind of corny, dude. They just put this little thing in, and people were, like, walking up and down. Like, no, bro, you don't understand. Like, I watched what happened in Chicago, and I watched what happened in other cities that this takes place in, and it's all around, it's a good thing, and it's going to drive values up. And the cool thing about the Beltline is there's a lot of available inventory. So when we wrap around the Beltline clockwise, when we start up here between 1 and 3, that's $1 million neighborhood. When we get down here, it's like 400,000 or 500,000. When we get down here, it's like down to around 300,000. When we get up here, you can buy that stuff for cash sale for like 65 grand. It still feels like the hood, though. You got like drug activity there. It still feels risky to me. But there's a lot of institutional investors who have already hopped on and are building like 40, 60, 100-unit brand new construction apartment complexes and otherwise vacant properties there. So we have a lot of inventory still yet to buy. So like depending on your cash, you can buy something way up here, or you can like, if you have more money, you can invest more money. So it really like, it offers the investment opportunity for the full spectrum of folks that are coming to the table. We had a property in here 6 months ago that we could have sold for about 45 grand. We had it under contract for 20. We had to do some title issues. We ended up selling, I think, for like 75,000. 6 months. We had another one up here. We had it for 20. It was like the same thing. I think we got 60 for that one because it was like 4 months while we were waiting for title, and the property went from like selling it for 30 to like selling it for 60 almost overnight. The cash sales doubled while we had it under contract just to signing it, let alone somebody's going to buy it. Those people will all have the last laugh, and I'll be that guy saying, damn, look at these properties selling for 400 grand now, all this new development. We had this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to buy property when the cities were starting to gentrify. It'd be like all those New Yorkers telling stories about how the buildings went up to $1 million. That'll take place in these neighborhoods. This was the one right here, $300,000 houses. We had the contract, I think, 20, 30,000, something like that. We could have sold it for 45. Beltline property, huge investment, huge job growth, connected to all the neighborhoods. You can like walk to the beer garden. It's probably a 20-minute walk from here, a mile or two walk. And this is the one we sold, that house. And I think we might be waiting to go to settlement. But we got $75,000 for that one. So there's a little bit of risks for gentrification. So like I'll tell you that's the end all, cure all, be all. to buying real estate and getting really rich as a result of doing it. But you could have a couple things go wrong. Neighborhood blowback. So like my break-in up in Kensington may not have been about getting $20 for the water heater as much as it's about these asshole rich guys are coming in and buying up all of our shit. We don't like that. Ori Fivebush's house has got burned down. They're spray painting. So there's neighborhood blowback that you kind of have to deal with as a result of this change. Not everybody's going to be as open-minded about becoming more successful in their life. They're real happy with what they got going on, and they're not really willing to change, and they're even willing to fight to keep it that way. The school system could become a big problem. The millennials could change their minds. So people my age and younger who are occupying and thinking the cities are cool could all of a sudden say, oh man, we're having kids and we don't like the schools. We're going out to the suburbs. We're getting out of Dodge. And you could see like a mass exodus of the people who are occupying the properties at this point now. Recession could happen, and the wave would recede. So that's what I saw happen in Point Breeze. 2007, 8, and 9, the wave was like just crossing over Washington Avenue of gentrification into Federal Street, and then the recession happened, and all of a sudden no one wanted to touch any of it, and the properties did drop by 20, 30, 40 grand. And then a few years went by, and the 40 recovered, and then it surpassed that point. And the only other thing, too, would be that the internet cocooning of humanity. So people are also becoming more and more disparate, like separate, and like doing their own thing. Like, I don't go to Target. I barely go to Whole Foods anymore. And like my doorman has a shopping cart full of packages because I don't have the time. My time is better spent doing comps and making offers than it is standing in line at Target to pick up shaving cream. So it all comes to the house. So the internet has the possibility of continuing to separate people more and more, where people may have a tendency or change their minds and say, yeah, we can live a little farther away. We don't really want to deal with everybody else. So these, in my opinion, right here would be the risks of gentrification. But even in the investments that I make, as long as my cash flow is covered, I guess I'm going to have to sit with those rentals unless something even more catastrophic happens that I'm unaware of. So, questions and answers. I think I promised to tell you how I'm funding the deals. I use Ironbridge. I use other hard money lenders. I pay 2 points, 12% interest. I do refis with banks to get package deals. I also borrow money from private investors at 10%, giving them first position mortgage. So generally it's the same way that we all flip properties, sell properties, etc. That's kind of how I'm funding these. And my absolute favorite way to fund properties is just to call my bank and wire the money in for settlement. Questions? Chris. The question was, you see 50% explosion of values instantaneously around the 606 trail in Chicago, and do I see that happening in the South Philly market like perhaps or some of the other markets? I think that the 606 trail, and I also believe that the Beltline property in Atlanta, I think they were both better opportunities for an event, short-term appreciation gain. Does that make sense? Those little micro markets had the opportunity to explode at a much faster rate because it's a higher pressure of lower supply. Only the supply is right around that belt line, only right around that trail. If I look at South Philly, I have the huge swath, all of South Philly from one river to the next river, and other than the fact that the trail is in Grays Ferry, so Grays Ferry is probably the other one. We did a deal, we had it under contract for $20,000, I think, and we were going to sell it for 30. We're all set to sell it for 30. Title issues, the house next door burns down. We sold it for 55 grand 4 months later. And it's being around something, and the more people recognize that that's just a cool thing to have those trails, as long as they continue to like that stuff. And you'll see one of the trends in humanity as well is people are living a more active lifestyle. People are exercising more. You're seeing gyms open up more. So something like the trail could become an even more and even more and even more valuable asset over the course of time that people will pay even more money to live near. So spotting little things that are going to take place like that, like the redevelopment of Casino, when that took place up in Fishtown, and then a handful of people got in behind that. When you see the 85,000 square foot building, they take the boards down because they've been hiding from the unions. All of a sudden, everyone looks up and there's this renovated building that used to be in the middle of a place where no one wanted to live. Those kind of things are more event driven, and you'll see that rapid appreciation.
So with Beltline and with 606 in Chicago, just fill it out on the table first, because you see the influx of renovations.
So the question is, the school system posing a big threat? Like right now, it seems like the millennials are buying a lot of these properties in the, Point Breeze and in the Grays Ferry area, and a lot of the other areas that might be a little more risky, especially for people with small children. And so, like, what might be happening in other cities to mitigate that? I haven't researched that in depth. I know that in Chicago, a lot of the people who are now occupying those properties, so like you have people who have good jobs downtown, they're millennials and they're just starting their career. George got up here and talked about how he moved up fast, rapidly in a period of a few years. So a lot of the times these people who are young urban professionals who are occupying these houses are going to get raises. They're going to make more money. They're just going to, in general, grow. The wife gets promoted, right? Now they're not doing a roommate situation. So like the people in Chicago, to answer the question, are doing a lot more private schooling. So that's just a cost. Hey, I'm living in the city and we don't really want to move. We really dig the restaurants. We dig everything that's going on here. So we're just going to pay for private schooling for our kids. Or we might move to the next neighborhood over. But meanwhile, the neighborhood they're not going to walk away from those houses like we saw back in, the 50s and 60s. Oh, the highway's here. We don't even care. We're gone. Like, it's not even going to be like the same willingness to leave unless there's like some tragedy thing, some kind of terrorist attack or some like way out of left field that everyone's like, oh my God, there's no way this is going to work for us in the city any longer.
Yeah, Ben Graham's strategy for Warren Buffett with value investing. How much value do you put on job growth? You put a lot on amenities, and how much do you put it on value?
I don't look at all the deals, so the way I'm looking at making my investment decisions is more based on the numbers I see taking place in the neighborhood. So if I'm like selling deals and everyone's rapidly bidding up, and I like in South Philly, I go from a property that I was going to make 10 grand on to we sold it for like 50-some thousand. So like our sale price went from 30 to 50, and we probably could have got 60, but we underpriced the deal. We didn't realize how hot all of a sudden it got. So like I'm more interested in capturing that like heat in the neighborhood, and I could be like completely foolish for not checking into everything. So I'll do like a brief look at population trends in a neighborhood, more so than I am looking at the job growth and stuff. So like I'm not buying right now in the Atlanta Beltline area. I don't really have the same team and comfort level with that area, because I did walk the area where 60 grand, 30 grand, and we were making big assignment fees. I walked it, and I'm like, this is cool and all, but this could turn into a crack alley real fast. This could be like a shooting gallery, and this could like completely turn the opposite direction, because who's going to police this? It's great. You just put in like paving stones. But what are we going to do? Are we now budgeting $4 million for police to walk the trail? Well, who wants to be in this like, Gestapo state type of, I'm going to like be running and here's like all these cops standing around? Like, so that's why I'm not buying there. I'm buying Chicago as this overall long-term, more of a gut feel. That was my intro when I said, yeah, I don't have all the facts and figures that I look at. So, my head's in the sand a little bit when it comes to job growth.
How do you pick property managers? You talk about buying properties you've never seen, which
yeah, I hear that. I've done like probably 1,000 deals where I just looked at the pictures and we make our buy decisions, and then I get used to just dealing with the people who are actually going to the property. The first couple we do with somebody who's first time out to the property is like a little more scary, but if I'm assigning a deal, it doesn't make much of a difference, but I got good at really assessing and getting comfortable with assets being a single family residential home. In a neighborhood like Philadelphia that was built in like the 1900s or 1930s, it's like similar construction. And like the worst case scenario, unless there's like, huge tragedy there, like I pretty much can do the whole house for 80 grand. So that's like my worst downside. I can probably patch, fix, stitch together and like keep a house together. You know what I mean? Like unless the thing literally had some foundation issue and was like completely caving in. I've had to deal with a lot of stuff on rehab. So I've gotten a comfort level with just my downside on the house. When I first got into business and never looked at a house before, I would think like, oh my God, I'll be completely wiped out by a house that had some problem that I couldn't really fix. And like, that was the case back then, but like now I can rebuild the house and it would be like a real painful hit, but I can like cover the loss. So it's more important for me to have my time and be able to like manage in all the other markets than it would be for me to like go out and look at each of those properties. The property manager came highly recommended from a guy I had been doing business with for a long period of time. The guy I was doing business with did like a rehab or two for me, so I was able to trust him to like kind of get the job done, do what he said he was going to do. And then the guy I have as my property manager now, he picks the phone up. I expect people to answer the phone for me on a Sunday afternoon if I call them. I'm not like calling them every Sunday, but when I text them on a Sunday, I'm not doing it every Sunday. I'm not doing it every Friday night. But if for some reason I got some issue, I don't want the guy who turns the cell phone off or the girl who turns the cell phone off can't be reached after 5 o'clock. If there's some kind of emergency or my business is that important, I bring that much value to the table for the people that I'm in relationships with that like, I got to be able to get a hold of them on a Sunday. So my property manager calls me back, gets on the phone, and basically just talks with me on a Sunday, Saturday, whatever day I call him. And so like I feel like I trust him. He puts the money in the account, and I've never actually met him face to face. I'll stick around. So like tax can be a risk in any area that you're investing in. And the cool thing about investing in a city rather than a suburb, so a suburb may look attractive right now because it has like reasonable property taxes. The tax situation in a city like Philadelphia or a city like Chicago, you have like a massive, huge population to at least pool the money. So if some guy embezzles $3 million, it's going to like slightly affect the taxes. Or if some other type of large, dollar amount thing happens in that municipality in a city, the city has a massive amount of money to deal with that and raise taxes incrementally, $2,500, $500 a year. But if you go to a city like Chicago Heights, which is right outside of Chicago, and you would have bought there a few years ago, and your property taxes were $3,000 a year, and you budgeted your rent on that, now that they had that big hit happen and they went to $12,000 per year, that was a huge risk that a lot of people made and didn't see. By being in a smaller area where there's only a smaller number of homes and number of households to spread the risk of catastrophe with everyone who lives there, all the taxes outside of the city of Chicago are tragically high. So like you saying $25,500, these taxes could double. And in comparison to other cities in the country, it will still look like a bargain because of all the things that a city like Philadelphia offers, especially the better the neighborhood too, the more the people, oh man, the taxes went up. But that's fine. You know what happens when the taxes go up on my property, or on properties I own? I bitch a little bit, and then I write the check, and then I send it. Same thing I do with the IRS. I used to complain and never want to pay taxes, and then I just pay the tax and just put it as fast as I can, and I'm done with it. So like I guess the tax problem might be for someone who's still stuck in the neighborhood and was living at the poverty line, and then the taxes really go up, they're kind of like forced out. I really don't have the best answer for taxes, but I know I'm more comfortable with the risk of taxes in cities than I am in smaller areas where the population just can't afford to sustain huge, dramatic problems with the budget. Well, guys, hey, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming out, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the REI Diamonds Show. If you are interested in receiving an email notification when I release the next episode, please sign up at www.reidiamonds.com. I also will give you a PDF download of my book for free, which I originally sold for $97 per download, called Become a Wholesale Real Estate Master. And this is basically my story, my method, my business plan for building diamond equity investments, which if you've been around our network any length of time, you've probably gotten sick of all the emails that I send you with all of the deals, the wholesale deals, and all the various markets that I am currently operating my business. So if you sign up to receive the episode, keep an eye out for that initial email. That book contains a ton of value, and there are a number of people who are currently full-time in real estate investing who have left six-figure jobs, six-figure-a-year jobs, who are now full-time wholesaling, fixing, flipping, you got it, real estate investing full-time. And I know that that book has been a catalyst for a number of people to jumpstart their business in that direction. So if you are currently interested in selling a deal to me or buying a deal from me, I want you to also visit www.reidiamonds.com and click the link at the top of the page. I currently either have deals available for sale or am looking to buy deals in the following markets: the Philadelphia tri-state area, the Baltimore, Maryland, D.C. market, the Chicagoland region, the Atlanta, Georgia region, and the Tampa Bay area in Florida. Finally, do you know anybody else who might also enjoy this episode? I appreciate the referrals, and I'm sure they would love the content discussed on this episode. You can share easily from the iTunes app and most of the other podcasting apps by generating a link and texting or emailing that link So I do appreciate you doing that. And last but not least, I appreciate you, my loyal REI Diamond Show listener. Dan Breslin here. Catch you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the REI Diamonds Show with Dan Breslin. To receive email notifications of new weekly episodes, sign up at www.reidiamonds.com.